Close your eyes for a moment and imagine this. Right now, at this very second, somewhere in Tokyo, a salaryman is gulping down his fourth espresso of the morning. In Seattle, a barista is crafting a venti caramel macchiato with an extra shot. In London, afternoon tea is being poured into delicate china cups. In Istanbul, thick Turkish coffee is being read for fortunes in the grounds left behind. And in your own hand, perhaps, there's a mug growing cold as you listen to these words. What connects all of these moments across time and space? What invisible thread weaves through the fabric of human civilization, pulling us forward, keeping us awake, driving us to build empires and tear them down again? The answer is a molecule. A simple, elegant, beautiful molecule called trimethylxanthine. You know it better as caffeine. Before we dive deep into this story, a story that will take us from the ancient forests of Ethiopia to the gleaming towers of Silicon Valley, let me ask you something. Have you ever really stopped to think about how weird it is that we're all basically drug addicts? That our entire modern world runs on a psychoactive substance that we consume without a second thought? That billions of people literally cannot function without their daily fix? If you're finding this story as fascinating as I do, go ahead and hit that subscribe button for dreamless timelines. Trust me, you're gonna want to stick around for where this journey takes us. And drop a like if you're already hooked, because this tale is just getting started. The story of caffeine isn't just about a drink or a drug. It's about how a simple plant chemical reshaped human consciousness itself, how it fueled revolutions and built corporations, how it changed the way we think, work, and dream. And yeah, I know the irony isn't lost on anyone that we're talking about the world's most popular stimulant in a video designed to help you sleep. But that's kind of perfect, isn't it? Because the story of caffeine is the story of opposites, of energy and exhaustion, of civilization and its discontents. So settle in. Get comfortable. Let your mind drift as we travel back through time, across continents, through wars and peace, through the rise and fall of empires, all in pursuit of understanding this remarkable substance that courses through the veins of modern society. Our story begins, as so many great stories do, with a legend. In the highlands of Ethiopia, sometime around the 9th century, there lived a goat herder named Kaldi. Now, Kaldi was a pretty regular guy, doing a pretty regular job in a pretty regular way. Every day, he'd wake up before dawn, gather his goats, and lead them up into the hills to graze. Day after day, the same routine, the same mountains, the same sky. But one day, something changed. Kaldi noticed his goats acting absolutely bonkers. They were jumping around, full of energy, bleating with what could only be described as pure joy. They weren't sleeping at night. They were dancing, literally dancing on their hind legs. Now, if you've ever seen a goat, you know they're already pretty weird animals, but this was next level. Kaldi watched his goats carefully, trying to figure out what had gotten into them. And that's when he saw it. The goats were eating berries from a particular tree, a tree with glossy green leaves and bright red cherries. Being a curious sort of fellow, and probably figuring that if it was good enough for his goats, it was good enough for him, Kaldi tried some of the berries himself. And suddenly, Kaldi understood. The fog that normally clouded his early mornings lifted. His thoughts became crystal clear. Energy surged through his body. He felt awake, truly awake, maybe for the first time in his life. The world seemed sharper, brighter, more alive. Excited by his discovery, Kaldi rushed to the local monastery to tell the monks about these miraculous berries. The head monk, a stern and pious man, was skeptical. He looked at these strange berries, listened to Kaldi's wild story about dancing goats and supernatural energy, and declared them the work of the devil. He threw the berries into the fire. But then something unexpected happened. As the berries roasted in the flames, an aroma began to fill the room. It was unlike anything anyone had ever smelled before. Rich, complex, intoxicating. The monks were mesmerized. When the fire died down, they collected the roasted beans, and somebody, some genius whose name is lost to history, had the idea to pour hot water over them. That night, as the monks drank this new beverage during their evening prayers, they discovered they could stay awake longer, pray with more focus, feel more connected to the divine. They had stumbled upon something that would change the world, though they couldn't have possibly known it at the time. Now, I'm gonna level with you. This story about Kaldi and his dancing goats? It's probably baloney. It showed up way too late in the historical record to be reliable. But like all good legends, it contains a kernel of truth. Somewhere, somehow, somebody in the Ethiopian highlands did discover coffee. And from that single discovery, everything else followed. The coffee plant, Coffea arabica, grew wild in the forests of Ethiopia. The indigenous Oromo people had known about it for centuries before Kaldi's alleged discovery. They would grind the cherries and mix them with animal fat to create energy balls for warriors heading into battle. Imagine that. The first energy bar in human history was basically coffee-flavored lard. For centuries, coffee remained a regional thing, a secret of the Ethiopian highlands. But secrets, especially delicious ones, have a way of spreading. By the 15th century, coffee had made its way across the Red Sea to Yemen, in the southern part of the Arabian Peninsula. And this is where things get really interesting. Because in Yemen, coffee underwent a transformation. The Sufis, Islamic mystics who practiced a form of worship that involved staying up all night in prayer and meditation, absolutely loved coffee. It helped them achieve the mental clarity and alertness they needed for their spiritual practices. They called it kawa, which originally meant wine, because of its invigorating effects. The Yemenis began to cultivate coffee systematically. They developed the practice of roasting the beans, grinding them, and brewing them in hot water. They created the drink we would recognize today as coffee. And they guarded their monopoly jealously. All exported coffee beans were boiled or roasted to prevent germination. You literally couldn't grow coffee anywhere else, because the Yemenis made damn sure that no living seeds left the country. But economics and human desire are more powerful than any monopoly. Coffee was spreading through the Islamic world, carried by pilgrims returning from Mecca. In Cairo, in Damascus, in Istanbul, in Baghdad, coffee houses began to spring up. And these weren't just places to grab a quick drink. They became centers of social life, intellectual discourse, political debate. The first coffee house in Constantinople, modern-day Istanbul, opened in 1555. Within a few years, there were dozens, then hundreds. People called them schools of the wise, because you could go there and hear the latest news, debate philosophy, play chess, listen to music, conduct business. For the price of a cup of coffee, a regular person could participate in the intellectual life of the city. But this made the authorities nervous. Really nervous. Because when people gather in groups, when they stay awake and alert, when they talk freely and think clearly, they start to question things. They start to wonder why things are the way they are. They start to imagine how things could be different. In 1511, the governor of Mecca, a guy named Kerbeg, banned coffee. He claimed it was as intoxicating as wine, which was forbidden in Islam. But let's be real, he was probably more worried about the political discussions happening in coffeehouses than about the theological implications of the beverage itself. The ban didn't last long. The Sultan of Egypt, who loved his coffee, overruled it. This pattern would repeat itself over and over throughout history. Rulers would ban coffee, citing religious or health concerns, but really they were just scared of what happened when people got together and started talking. And every time, the bans failed. Because once humanity gets a taste of caffeine, we don't give it up easily. If you're still with me on this journey, and I hope you are because we're just getting to the good stuff, go ahead and leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from and what your caffeinated beverage of choice is. Are you team coffee? Team tea? Or are you one of those rebels chugging energy drinks? I want to know. By the early 17th century, European merchants and travelers returning from the Ottoman Empire brought tales of this exotic new drink. Coffee came to Venice first, in the early 1600s. Some priests declared it the bitter invention of Satan, because it was associated with Islam. They called for Pope Clement VIII to ban it. But the Pope, bless his caffeinated heart, decided to try coffee before condemning it. According to legend, after taking a sip, he declared, "This devil's drink is so delicious that it would be a pity to let the infidels have exclusive use of it. We shall cheat Satan by baptizing it." And just like that, with papal approval, coffee began its conquest of Europe. The first European coffeehouse opened in Oxford, England, in 1650. 2 years later, London got its first coffeehouse. By 1700, there were more than 2,000 coffeehouses in London alone. They called them penny universities, because for the price of a penny, you could buy a cup of coffee and listen to extraordinary conversations. Each coffeehouse developed its own character, its own clientele. Lloyd's Coffeehouse became the gathering place for shipping merchants and eventually evolved into Lloyd's of London, the insurance giant. Jonathan's Coffeehouse was where stockbrokers met, and it became the London Stock Exchange. The Chapter Coffeehouse was where publishers and booksellers gathered. The Grecian was the hangout for scientists and philosophers. Think about that for a second. Some of the most important financial institutions in the modern world started as places where guys drank coffee and talked shop. The entire infrastructure of global capitalism was literally built on caffeine. And it wasn't just business. The coffeehouses became centers of revolutionary thought. In England, they were hotbeds of political debate during the tumultuous 17th century. In France, the cafés of Paris became the breeding grounds for Enlightenment philosophy and, eventually, revolution. The Café Procope in Paris, which opened in 1686, was frequented by Voltaire, Rousseau, and Diderot. These guys would sit there for hours, drinking coffee, smoking pipes, and hatching ideas that would topple monarchies and reshape Western civilization. Voltaire supposedly drank 40 to 50 cups of coffee a day. Whether that's true or not, it makes for a great story. But here's the thing about coffee in Europe. It created a fundamental shift in consciousness, literally. Before coffee, Europeans drank alcohol all day. And I mean all day. Water wasn't safe, so people drank beer and wine from breakfast onward. Imagine trying to do intellectual work while mildly buzzed all the time. Coffee changed that. Suddenly, there was a beverage that was safe to drink, that tasted good, and that made you more alert instead of less. Coffee didn't just change what people drank. It changed how they thought. It made possible the kind of sustained, focused intellectual effort required for scientific research, philosophical inquiry, and industrial production. The Industrial Revolution doesn't happen without coffee. Full stop. You can't have factory workers showing up drunk. You can't have precision manufacturing with workers who are half asleep. Coffee made it possible for humans to align their working hours with the rhythms of machines rather than the rhythms of nature. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's rewind a bit and talk about how coffee actually got to Europe in the first place, because that story involves international intrigue, theft, romance, and a lot of very determined plants. Remember how I said the Yemenis guarded their coffee monopoly jealously? Well, around 1616, a Dutch merchant named Peter van den Broek managed to smuggle some living coffee plants out of Yemen. How he did it, we don't know exactly. Maybe he bribed someone. Maybe he snuck them out hidden in his luggage. Maybe he charmed his way past the authorities. However he did it, those plants made it back to Amsterdam, where the Dutch began cultivating coffee in greenhouses. Then they took cuttings to their colonies in Ceylon, modern-day Sri Lanka, and Java, in what is now Indonesia. And this is where the word Java, as slang for coffee, comes from, by the way. Because Java became one of the world's major coffee producers, and Dutch ships brought Javanese coffee to markets around the globe. The French weren't about to let the Dutch have all the fun. In 1714, the mayor of Amsterdam gave King Louis XIV of France a coffee plant as a gift. It was kept in the Royal Botanical Gardens in Paris, where it was treated like the precious treasure it was. Then, in 1723, a French naval officer named Gabriel de Clou decided to do something crazy. He was heading to the French colony of Martinique in the Caribbean, and he decided to bring a cutting from the king's coffee plant with him. The journey was a nightmare. The ship was attacked by pirates. There was a violent storm. Water rations ran short, and de Clou shared his own drinking water with the coffee plant to keep it alive. A jealous fellow passenger tried to destroy the plant, tearing off a branch. But de Clou protected it, nursed it, kept it alive through sheer force of will. When he finally arrived in Martinique, he planted that single, precious cutting. And from that one plant, millions descended. Within a few decades, coffee was growing throughout the Caribbean and Central and South America. Today, Brazil is the world's largest coffee producer, and chances are the coffee you drank this morning came from beans that can trace their lineage back to the Cluse plant. The spread of coffee cultivation represents one of the greatest ecological transformations in human history. Vast swaths of forest were cleared to make way for coffee plantations. Indigenous peoples were displaced or enslaved. The environment was reshaped to serve humanity's caffeine addiction. And here's where the story gets really dark, because we need to talk about slavery and colonialism and the true cost of that morning cup of joe. Coffee and slavery are intertwined in ways that are uncomfortable to think about but essential to understand. In the Caribbean, in Brazil, in other parts of Latin America, coffee plantations were worked by enslaved Africans. Millions of people were torn from their homes, transported across the ocean in horrific conditions, and forced to labor in the coffee fields under brutal regimes. The wealth generated by coffee helped fund the slave trade, and the slave trade provided the labor force for coffee production. It was a vicious cycle, and the effects of it echo through history to this day. Even after slavery was officially abolished, the exploitation continued. Plantation workers were paid starvation wages, forced to work in dangerous conditions, denied basic rights. In Guatemala, in Colombia, in Ethiopia itself, coffee workers were treated as expendable resources. This is part of coffee's story too. Not just the elegant cafes of Paris or the bustling coffeehouses of London, but the blood and sweat and tears that made those places possible. The human cost of caffeine. It's something to think about, maybe, as you sip your next cup. Where did these beans come from? Who grew them? Under what conditions? It's a sobering thought, and I don't mean to bring down the mood, but any honest history of coffee has to reckon with this reality. Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about the other great caffeinated beverage, because coffee isn't the only player in this story. Tea has its own remarkable history, and in many ways, it shaped the modern world even more profoundly than coffee. Tea, according to Chinese legend, was discovered by the Emperor Shen Nong in 2737 BCE. The story goes that the emperor was boiling water to drink when leaves from a nearby tea tree blew into his pot. He tried the resulting brew and found it refreshing and invigorating. Like the story of Kaldi and his goats, this is almost certainly mythology. But what we know for sure is that tea has been cultivated and consumed in China for at least 2,000 years. It was originally valued as a medicinal herb, believed to promote health and longevity. During the Tang dynasty, from the 7th to 10th centuries, tea drinking became an art form. Tea masters developed elaborate ceremonies. Poets wrote odes to tea. The philosopher Lu Yu wrote the Classic of Tea, a treatise on tea cultivation, preparation, and appreciation that remains influential today. Tea spread to Japan, where it became even more ritualized. The Japanese tea ceremony, developed in the 16th century, turned tea drinking into a spiritual practice, a meditation on simplicity, harmony, and the beauty of imperfection. But in the West, tea's journey was different. It arrived in Europe around the same time as coffee, in the early 1600s. The Portuguese and Dutch brought it first, trading with China and Japan. It was expensive, exotic, and became associated with sophistication and refinement. In England, tea drinking was popularized by Catherine of Braganza, the Portuguese princess who married King Charles II in 1662. She brought the habit of tea drinking from Portugal, and it became fashionable among the British aristocracy. But tea was insanely expensive. It was literally worth more than its weight in silver. So the British did what the British do best. They figured out how to dominate the trade through a combination of corporate power, military might, and, let's be honest, ruthless exploitation. The East India Company, that great engine of British imperialism, monopolized the tea trade with China. They bought tea using silver, and the silver was flowing out of Britain at an alarming rate. The British needed something to sell to the Chinese to balance the trade. So they chose opium. The British grew opium in India and smuggled it into China, creating millions of addicts and destabilizing Chinese society. When the Chinese government tried to crack down on the opium trade, the British went to war. twice. These were literally called the Opium Wars, and they were fought to preserve Britain's right to sell drugs to the Chinese. It's hard to overstate how messed up this was. The British Empire went to war, killed thousands of people, and forced an entire nation into unequal treaties, all because they wanted to drink tea and didn't want to pay for it with silver. The Opium Wars forced China to open up to Western trade and marked the beginning of what the Chinese call the Century of Humiliation. The effects of this period still influence Chinese politics and worldview today. But the British weren't satisfied with just trading for tea. They wanted to grow it themselves, to break China's monopoly. And this is where another tale of botanical espionage comes in. In 1848, the East India Company hired a Scottish botanist named Robert Fortune to go to China and steal tea plants and tea-making expertise. Fortune disguised himself as a Chinese merchant, traveled deep into tea-growing regions, and smuggled out thousands of plants and seeds. He also convinced Chinese tea workers to come to India and teach their methods. The British began cultivating tea in India, particularly in Assam and Darjeeling. They also started growing it in Ceylon, modern-day Sri Lanka. Within a few decades, British colonies were producing more tea than China. And this tea, cheaper than the Chinese variety, flooded the market. Tea went from being a luxury for the rich to a staple for the masses. In Britain, tea drinking became a national obsession. Morning tea, afternoon tea, high tea, the tea break. British identity itself became wrapped up in tea consumption. The working classes drank strong, sweet tea with milk. It provided calories, warmth, and a caffeine boost for people working long hours in factories. Tea sustained the British working class through the Industrial Revolution. If you've made it this far in the story, first of all, thank you. I know we're going deep here, but that's what Dreamless Timelines is all about. Rich, immersive histories that let you drift off while learning something amazing. If you haven't subscribed yet, now's a perfect time. And leave a like if you're enjoying the journey. Comments are open too. I love hearing your thoughts. Now, let's hop across the Atlantic and talk about how caffeine shaped American history, because this is where things get really interesting. Tea was hugely popular in the American colonies in the 18th century. It was imported by the British East India Company and sold in colonial markets. But tea also became a symbol of British authority and taxation. You probably know where this is going. In 1773, in protest against British taxes, a group of colonists disguised as Mohawk Indians boarded ships in Boston Harbor and dumped 342 chests of tea into the water. The Boston Tea Party, as it became known, was one of the key events leading to the American Revolution. After independence, Americans turned away from tea. It was seen as too British, too associated with the old colonial masters. Instead, Americans became coffee drinkers. Coffee was the patriotic choice, the beverage of liberty and independence. This is kind of hilarious when you think about it. Americans defined themselves in opposition to British culture by choosing one caffeinated beverage over another. But that's nationalism for you. It's all about symbols and identity. Coffee became woven into the American story. Cowboys on the frontier drank cowboy coffee, grounds boiled directly in water. Civil War soldiers on both sides drank coffee to stay alert during long marches and battles. It was such an essential part of military life that Confederate soldiers sometimes called truces with Union soldiers just to trade tobacco for coffee. Imagine that. In the middle of a brutal civil war, enemies would meet in no man's land, not to fight, but to swap tobacco and coffee. That's how badly people needed their caffeine fix. After the Civil War, as America industrialized, coffee consumption soared. Workers needed to stay alert during long factory shifts. The coffee break became an American institution, a brief respite from the monotony of industrial labor. Coffee companies became some of the largest corporations in America. Folgers, Maxwell House, Hills Brothers, these brands became household names. They advertised heavily, creating the image of coffee as essential to American life. Good to the last drop wasn't just a slogan. It was a promise that coffee would always be there, reliable and comforting. But American coffee had a problem. It tasted like crap. I'm sorry, But it's true. Mass-produced, pre-ground, canned coffee was convenient and cheap, but it was also stale and bitter. Americans got used to drinking really bad coffee, and they didn't know any better. This changed in the late 20th century with the specialty coffee movement. In 1966, Alfred Peet opened Peet's Coffee in Berkeley, California. Peet was a Dutchman who had grown up in the coffee trade and was appalled by the quality of American coffee. He imported high-quality beans, roasted them dark, and sold them fresh. Peet's inspired a generation of coffee entrepreneurs. 3 of his customers, Jerry Baldwin, Zev Siegel, and Gordon Boker, were so impressed that they opened their own coffee shop in Seattle in 1971. They called it Starbucks, after the first mate in Moby Dick. For its first decade, Starbucks just sold beans and equipment. It was a coffee roaster, not a cafe. But in 1982, they hired a guy named Howard Schultz to head their marketing. Schultz traveled to Italy and was blown away by the espresso bar culture there. He had a vision of bringing that culture to America. The original Starbucks owners weren't interested, so Schultz left and started his own chain called Il Giornale. But in 1987, he bought Starbucks and merged the companies. And then he went on a tear, opening store after store after store. Starbucks didn't just sell coffee. They sold an experience, a lifestyle. The third place, between home and work where you could relax, work, meet friends. They trained baristas to make espresso drinks properly. They created a whole new vocabulary. Tall, grande, venti, half CAF, no foam, extra shot. By the early 2000s, there was a Starbucks on practically every corner in urban America. The company became a symbol of globalization, both celebrated and reviled. Protesters smashed Starbucks windows during anti-globalization demonstrations. But millions of people lined up every morning for their venti lattes anyway. Starbucks changed coffee culture worldwide. They proved that people would pay $5 for a cup of coffee if you made it well and gave them a nice place to drink it. They created an entire industry of specialty coffee shops, each trying to out Starbucks by being more authentic, more local, more artisanal. The third wave coffee movement emerged in the early 2000s as a reaction to Starbucks. These were coffee shops that treated coffee like wine, emphasizing the origin of the beans, the roasting process, the brewing method. Baristas became craftspeople, artists even. Coffee geeks debated the merits of different brewing methods. Pour-over, French press, Chemex, AeroPress, siphon. Coffee became complicated. And here we are today, in an era where you can get a scientifically optimized cup of single-origin Ethiopian Yirgacheffe brewed at precisely 200 degrees Fahrenheit for exactly 4 minutes, or you can grab a Red Bull from a gas station and chug it in your car. Both are socially acceptable ways to consume caffeine, which tells you something about modern society. But let's zoom out for a second and talk about caffeine itself, the molecule at the heart of all this. What is caffeine, actually? What does it do to us? Why do we crave it so intensely? Caffeine is an alkaloid, a naturally occurring compound that plants produce as a defense mechanism. It's basically a pesticide. Insects that eat caffeine-containing plants get all jittery and confused and leave the plant alone. It's nature's way of saying, "Don't eat me, I'll mess you up." But humans, being the weird creatures we are, discovered that this plant poison, in the right doses, makes us feel great. It blocks adenosine receptors in the brain. Adenosine is a neurotransmitter that accumulates throughout the day and makes you feel tired. When caffeine blocks adenosine, you feel more awake and alert. Caffeine also increases dopamine levels, which makes you feel good. It's not as intense as cocaine or amphetamines, obviously, but it's the same basic mechanism. Caffeine is literally a drug, a psychoactive substance that alters brain chemistry. And we're all addicts. I mean that literally. If you consume caffeine regularly and then stop, you'll experience withdrawal symptoms. Headaches, fatigue, irritability, difficulty concentrating. These symptoms can last for days or even weeks. The headaches are the worst. They happen because caffeine causes blood vessels in the brain to constrict. When you stop consuming caffeine, those blood vessels dilate, which causes pain. Your brain literally hurts because it's not getting its drug. But here's the thing. Caffeine is relatively safe, as drugs go. You can consume moderate amounts every day for your entire life without serious health consequences. In fact, there's evidence that moderate coffee consumption is actually good for you. It's associated with lower risks of certain diseases, including Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, type 2 diabetes, and some cancers. Of course, too much caffeine causes problems. Anxiety, insomnia, rapid heartbeat, digestive issues. You can technically overdose on caffeine, though you'd have to consume a huge amount. The lethal dose is around 10 grams for most adults, which would require drinking about 100 cups of coffee in a short period. You'd probably puke it all up before you got that far. But people do occasionally die from caffeine, usually from consuming concentrated forms like pure caffeine powder or way too many energy drinks. It's rare, but it happens. Energy drinks, man. Let's talk about those for a minute, because they represent a fascinating evolution in caffeine consumption. Red Bull, Monster, Rockstar, Bang, Celsius, there are hundreds of brands now, each promising to give you wings or unleash the beast or whatever ridiculous marketing slogan they've come up with. Red Bull was the first modern energy drink, launched in Austria in 1987. It was based on a Thai drink called Krating Daeng, which was popular with truck drivers and laborers who needed to stay awake. An Austrian entrepreneur named Dietrich Mateschitz tried it in Thailand, loved it, partnered with a Thai company, and created a carbonated version for Western markets. The marketing was genius. Red Bull didn't advertise itself as a drink. It was a lifestyle brand, associated with extreme sports, adventure, pushing limits. They sponsored athletes, events, even created their own media production company. They made drinking their product seem cool, edgy, rebellious. And it worked. Red Bull became a multi-billion-dollar company. Other companies rushed to copy the formula. The energy drink market exploded. But here's the weird part. Most energy drinks don't actually contain that much caffeine. A can of Red Bull has about 80 milligrams of caffeine, less than a cup of coffee. What they do have is a bunch of other stuff. Taurine, B vitamins, sugar or artificial sweeteners, and various herbal extracts of questionable efficacy. The energy boost you feel from an energy drink is mostly just the caffeine and sugar. The other stuff is there for marketing purposes, to make the product seem more powerful and scientific than it actually is. But people believe in energy drinks. They've become part of youth culture, particularly among gamers, students, and people working long hours. Walk into any college library during finals week, and you'll see a graveyard of energy drink cans. The concern is that young people are consuming way too much caffeine, often combining energy drinks with coffee or caffeinated sodas. There have been reports of teenagers having heart problems, seizures, even dying after consuming multiple energy drinks. The FDA doesn't regulate caffeine content in beverages very strictly, which means companies can put pretty much whatever they want in their products. It's a bit of a Wild West situation. And it's not just drinks anymore. You can get caffeinated gum, beef jerky, peanut butter, oatmeal, brownies, waffles. There's caffeinated soap that supposedly absorbs through your skin while you shower. There are caffeinated inhalers. The caffeine industry is constantly innovating, finding new ways to deliver the drug. The latest trend is nootropics, so-called smart drugs that combine caffeine with various supplements that supposedly enhance cognitive function. L-theanine, alpha-GPC, rhodiola rosea, bacopa monnieri. There's limited scientific evidence for most of these substances, but that doesn't stop companies from selling them or people from buying them. We're in an era of pharmacological self-optimization. People aren't just drinking coffee anymore. They're microdosing caffeine throughout the day, stacking it with other substances, tracking their consumption with apps, trying to hack their biology to extract maximum productivity. And this brings us to the present moment, where caffeine has become more than just a drink or a drug. It's become essential to how modern capitalism functions. Think about it. Our entire economy is based on people being productive, being alert, being available. The standard work schedule, 9 to 5 or longer, doesn't align with natural human rhythms. Without caffeine, most people couldn't sustain that level of alertness and focus. Caffeine makes it possible for people to work longer hours, to be available at all times, to respond to emails at midnight, to pull all-nighters to meet deadlines. It's the invisible infrastructure of the attention economy. Silicon Valley runs on caffeine. Tech companies have elaborate coffee programs. Free espresso machines, cold brew on tap, every variety of tea you can imagine. It's not just a perk. It's a productivity tool. They want workers alert, focused, coding for 12 hours straight. And it's not just tech. Every modern office has a coffee maker. Factory workers get coffee breaks. Truck drivers drink coffee to stay awake on long hauls. Medical residents chug energy drinks during 36-hour shifts. Soldiers in combat zones consume caffeinated gum and energy drinks. The military is particularly interesting. The US military spends millions of dollars a year on caffeinated products. They've developed caffeinated gum specifically for soldiers because it delivers caffeine faster than drinking coffee. They've researched optimal caffeine dosing for different combat scenarios. There are even caffeine algorithms, mathematical models that calculate exactly when and how much caffeine a person should consume to maintain peak alertness. The military uses these to help soldiers stay alert during long missions with minimal sleep. It's dystopian when you think about it. We've created a society where people need to be constantly medicated just to function, where natural sleep rhythms are seen as obstacles to overcome rather than biological necessities to respect. And the effects are becoming apparent. We're in the middle of a sleep deprivation epidemic. The average American gets less than 7 hours of sleep a night, and a significant percentage get less than 6. This has serious health consequences. Increased risk of obesity, diabetes, heart disease, mental health problems, cognitive decline. Caffeine helps us cope with sleep deprivation, but it doesn't solve it. You can't actually replace sleep with coffee. Eventually, the debt comes due. Your body needs rest, real rest, not just chemically induced alertness. But we keep drinking coffee, keep popping caffeine pills, keep chugging energy drinks. Because the alternative is admitting that maybe our whole society is organized in a fundamentally unhealthy way. Hey, if you're still awake and listening to this, I'm impressed. We've been on quite a journey together. If you're finding value in this deep dive into caffeine's history, hit that subscribe button for dreamless timelines. We do this kind of long-form historical storytelling regularly. And don't forget to like and comment. It helps more people find these videos. Let's talk about where caffeine consumption is headed, because the story isn't over. If anything, we're entering a new phase. Coffee consumption worldwide continues to grow. As countries develop economically, their coffee consumption tends to increase. China, traditionally a tea-drinking nation, is developing a serious coffee habit. Coffee chains are expanding rapidly in Chinese cities. Young Chinese professionals are embracing coffee culture as a marker of modernity and sophistication. The same pattern is repeating in India, in Southeast Asia, in parts of Africa. Coffee is becoming globalized in ways that would have been unimaginable a century ago. But this growth raises serious questions about sustainability. Coffee is already one of the most traded commodities in the world, second only to oil by some measures. The environmental impact of coffee production is substantial. Coffee grows best in tropical highlands, often in areas of high biodiversity. Expanding coffee cultivation means clearing forests, displacing wildlife, disrupting ecosystems. The traditional method of growing coffee under shade trees is being replaced by sun cultivation, where forests are cleared and coffee is grown in full sun with heavy use of fertilizers and pesticides. Climate change is also threatening coffee production. Rising temperatures are making traditional growing regions less suitable. Coffee rust, a fungal disease, is spreading as temperatures warm. Some models predict that by 2050, half of the land currently used for coffee cultivation will be unsuitable. This could lead to a coffee crisis, with prices soaring and availability declining. Or it could spur innovation. There are already efforts to develop climate-resistant coffee varieties, to improve farming practices, to find new growing regions. There's also the question of fairness. Coffee farmers, particularly small-scale farmers in developing countries, often live in poverty despite producing a commodity that generates billions of dollars in revenue. The coffee supply chain is long and complex, with multiple intermediaries taking their cut. By the time coffee reaches your cup, the farmer might have received less than $1 per pound. Fair trade and direct trade movements have tried to address this by cutting out intermediaries and ensuring farmers get a better price. These efforts have helped some farmers, but they're still a small fraction of the global coffee trade. And then there's the question of what comes next. Are we reaching peak caffeine? Is there a limit to how much productivity we can extract from humans, even with chemical assistance? Some people are experimenting with quitting caffeine entirely, claiming they feel better, sleep better, have more stable energy levels. The decoff movement is growing, not just among people who can't tolerate caffeine for medical reasons, but among people choosing to opt out of the caffeine cycle. There are also those who argue we should be looking for alternatives to caffeine. Other substances that could provide energy and focus without the same downsides. Modafinil, a wakefulness-promoting drug originally developed to treat narcolepsy, has become popular among students and professionals looking for a cognitive edge. Microdosing psychedelics is another trend, with people claiming that tiny amounts of LSD or psilocybin improve creativity and focus. Whether these alternatives will ever challenge caffeine's dominance is unclear. Caffeine has several advantages. It's legal, it's cheap, it's socially acceptable, and we have thousands of years of experience with it. Any alternative would have to overcome significant cultural and regulatory hurdles. More likely, we'll see a diversification of how people consume caffeine. Personalized caffeine products based on genetic testing. Smart pills that release caffeine at optimal times. Transdermal patches that deliver steady doses throughout the day. The technology exists. It's just a matter of someone developing it and marketing it effectively. We might also see increased regulation. Some countries are already restricting energy drink sales to minors. Others are considering putting limits on caffeine content in beverages. As the health effects of excessive caffeine consumption become clearer, there may be pressure to treat caffeine more like the drug it is. But I doubt caffeine is going anywhere. It's too deeply embedded in global culture, too essential to modern economic systems. Coffee and tea aren't just drinks. They're rituals, traditions, social bonds. They're how we start our mornings, how we take breaks, how we socialize with friends and colleagues. The smell of coffee brewing is, for many people, the smell of home, of comfort, of normalcy. Tea ceremonies in Japan, coffee ceremonies in Ethiopia, the British afternoon tea, the Italian espresso break, these are cultural practices that carry meaning far beyond the simple consumption of caffeine. And that's really what this whole story has been about. Yes, caffeine is a drug, a molecule that affects our brains in measurable ways. But it's also a vehicle for human connection, for culture, for meaning. Every cup of coffee contains within it the entire history we've been exploring. The Ethiopian highlands, the Yemeni monasteries, the Ottoman coffeehouses, the ships carrying tea and opium across the oceans, the slaves on Caribbean plantations, the factory workers of the Industrial Revolution, the baristas crafting the perfect latte. When you drink coffee or tea, you're participating in a global system that spans continents and centuries. You're connecting with millions of other people doing the same thing at the same moment. You're part of a tradition that has shaped and been shaped by human history. Is that profound, or is it just caffeine talking? Maybe it's both. Maybe that's the point. Caffeine changes how we think, and that change is recursive, feeding back into culture and society, which then creates new ways of consuming and thinking about caffeine. We're trapped in a loop, a cycle of dependence and desire that shows no signs of ending. And maybe that's okay. Every society has its rituals, its substances that mark the boundaries between sacred and profane, work and rest, public and private. For ancient Greeks, it was wine. For Native Americans, it was tobacco. For us, it's caffeine. It's the drug that makes modern life possible, for better and worse. You know, as I've been researching and writing this history, I've consumed probably a dozen cups of coffee. The irony isn't lost on me. I'm using the very substance I'm talking about to stay alert enough to talk about it. And I think that's fitting, actually. Because we can't step outside caffeine to examine it objectively. We're all inside it, swimming in it, shaped by it in ways we can barely perceive. Every scientific study about caffeine's effects has been conducted by researchers fueled by caffeine. Every book about coffee history was written by an author drinking coffee. This very script, these words you're hearing, were composed under the influence of the drug they describe. We can't see caffeine clearly because it's become part of how we see. It's the water we swim in, invisible and omnipresent. But maybe that's true of all really important things. We can't fully understand them because we're too embedded in them. We can only tell stories, map the contours, trace the history, and hope that in doing so we gain some small measure of insight. The story of caffeine is, ultimately, the story of human desire. The desire to be more alert, more productive, more connected. The desire to transcend our biological limitations, to reshape ourselves and our societies according to our will. And like all stories of desire, it's complicated. There's beauty and ugliness, liberation and exploitation, progress and destruction. There are winners and losers, beneficiaries and victims. The dancing goats of ancient Ethiopia, if they ever existed, set in motion a cascade of consequences that continues to this day. A simple plant in a highland forest became the fuel for global capitalism, the lubricant of social interaction, the drug of choice for billions. And here we are, at the end of this long journey through caffeine's history, and what have we learned? Maybe that history isn't really about the past. It's about understanding the present, about seeing how we got to where we are. We live in a caffeinated world, a world running at a pace that would be impossible without the stimulation of caffeine. We've built a civilization that requires us to be constantly alert, constantly productive, constantly on. Is that a good thing? I honestly don't know. It's certainly productive, in the narrow economic sense. It's generated enormous wealth, enabled incredible innovation, connected people across vast distances. But it's also exhausting. The always-on culture enabled by caffeine is grinding people down, burning them out, leaving them depleted and seeking more and more stimulation just to feel normal. Maybe the next chapter in caffeine's history will be about learning to use it more wisely. Not as a way to override our natural rhythms, but as a tool to be used thoughtfully and in moderation. Or maybe we'll just keep accelerating, consuming more caffeine in more forms, pushing ourselves harder and harder until something breaks. I don't have answers. I just have this story, this long, winding tale of a molecule and its relationship with humanity. A story that starts with goats and monks and ends with algorithms optimizing caffeine delivery to maximize productivity. It's a hell of a journey when you think about it. From the highlands of Ethiopia to the coffee shops of every city on Earth. From a local stimulant used by Sufi mystics to the most widely consumed psychoactive drug in human history. And it's not over. The story of caffeine continues to unfold every single day, in millions of small moments. The first sip of morning coffee. The afternoon tea break. The energy drink at midnight while cramming for an exam. The espresso after dinner. Each of these moments is a thread in the vast tapestry of caffeine's ongoing relationship with humanity. We're all part of this story, whether we realize it or not. So the next time you drink coffee or tea, maybe take a moment to think about what you're really drinking. It's not just a beverage. It's history, culture, economics, chemistry, desire, and habit all mixed together in a cup. It's the blood of modern civilization, the drug that keeps the world turning. It's your morning ritual and a global commodity. It's a source of pleasure and a tool of exploitation. It's all of this and more. And now, as this long story winds down, as your eyes grow heavy and sleep beckons, I want to thank you for joining me on this journey through caffeine's incredible history. We've traveled through time and space, from ancient Ethiopia to modern Silicon Valley, from goat herders to corporate executives, from the first cup ever drunk to the billions consumed today. If this story resonated with you, if you learned something or just enjoyed the ride, do me a favor. Subscribe to Dreamless Timelines. We create these immersive historical narratives regularly, deep dives into fascinating topics told in a way that lets you relax and drift off. Hit that like button if you enjoyed this one, and leave a comment. Tell me what you thought. Share your own caffeine story. I love hearing from you. The world of history is vast and endlessly fascinating, and there are so many more stories to tell. Stories of other substances, other technologies, other ideas that shaped humanity. And I'll be here, probably drinking coffee, researching and writing them for you. Until next time, sleep well, dream deep, and maybe, just maybe, give some thought to that cup of coffee you'll inevitably reach for when you wake up. Because now you know its story. You know the thousands of years of human history contained in those beans. You know the complexity, the contradiction, the beauty and the darkness all mixed together. You know that caffeine is more than just a morning pick-me-up. It's a thread connecting you to every other person who has ever drunk coffee or tea, stretching back through the centuries, spanning the globe, linking us all in this shared ritual of consumption and consciousness. It's a hell of a drug. And it's ours. Humanity's drug. The substance we chose, or that chose us, to fuel our journey from the caves to the stars. Actually, you know what? We're not done yet. Not by a long shot. Because the story of caffeine goes so much deeper than what we've covered so far. We've barely scratched the surface of this incredible tale. So get comfortable again. Settle back in. Because we're going deeper now. Into the science, the culture, the hidden corners of caffeine's relationship with humanity. This is where things get really fascinating. Let's start by talking about something we touched on briefly but need to explore in much more detail. The actual chemistry of what happens when you drink that cup of coffee. Because understanding the science helps us understand why caffeine has had such a profound impact on human civilization. When you take a sip of coffee, the caffeine starts absorbing into your bloodstream almost immediately. It passes through the lining of your mouth, your stomach, your small intestine. Within about 15 to 45 minutes, depending on various factors, caffeine levels in your blood reach their peak. Now here's where it gets interesting. Caffeine is a remarkably promiscuous molecule. It doesn't just affect one system in your body. It affects many, in complex and interconnected ways. The primary mechanism, as I mentioned earlier, is blocking adenosine receptors. But let's dig into what that actually means. Throughout the day, as you use energy, your cells break down a molecule called ATP. One of the breakdown products is adenosine. Adenosine accumulates in your brain and binds to adenosine receptors, essentially telling your brain, hey, you're getting tired. Time to slow down. This is a beautiful regulatory system, actually. It's your body's natural way of matching your activity level to your energy reserves. When you've been awake and active for a while, adenosine builds up, you feel tired, you rest, adenosine levels drop, you feel refreshed. Caffeine short-circuits this system. Its molecular structure is similar enough to adenosine that it can bind to adenosine receptors, but different enough that it doesn't activate them. It's like sticking a key into a lock that fits but doesn't turn. The real key, adenosine, can't get in, so you don't feel tired even though adenosine is still accumulating. But here's the thing. The adenosine doesn't go away. It's still there, still building up. When the caffeine wears off, all that accumulated adenosine hits those receptors at once. This is why you crash. It's not just that the caffeine is gone. It's that your body has been accumulating sleep pressure the whole time, and you suddenly feel all of it. This is also why tolerance develops. With regular caffeine use, your brain grows more adenosine receptors to compensate for the ones being blocked. You need more and more caffeine to get the same effect. And when you stop, you have all these extra receptors with nothing blocking them, which is why caffeine withdrawal feels so awful. But adenosine isn't the whole story. Caffeine also affects dopamine, that crucial neurotransmitter associated with pleasure, motivation, and reward. It doesn't create dopamine like cocaine does, but it makes the dopamine that's already there more effective. It does this by blocking adenosine receptors in areas of the brain where adenosine normally inhibits dopamine. With adenosine blocked, dopamine flows more freely. This is why coffee makes you feel good, not just alert. It's literally activating your brain's reward system. Caffeine also increases adrenaline levels. Adrenaline is your fight or flight hormone, the chemical your body releases when it thinks you're in danger. This is why caffeine makes your heart beat faster, why it can make you jittery or anxious. Your body is being told there's an emergency even when you're just sitting at a desk. In moderate doses, this adrenaline boost is invigorating. It increases alertness, improves physical performance, sharpens focus. But in high doses, or in people who are sensitive to caffeine, it can trigger anxiety, panic attacks, or a jittery, uncomfortable feeling. Caffeine also affects your cardiovascular system directly. It causes vasoconstriction, the narrowing of blood vessels, which is why it helps with headaches. Many headache medications contain caffeine. But this vasoconstriction can also raise blood pressure, at least temporarily. The effects on the digestive system are significant too. Caffeine stimulates the production of stomach acid, which can cause heartburn or upset stomach. It also has a laxative effect, stimulating contractions in your colon. This is why many people find that their morning coffee helps them, shall we say, stay regular. Now, the half-life of caffeine in the human body is about 5 to 6 hours on average. This means that 6 hours after you drink a cup of coffee, about half the caffeine is still in your system. 6 hours after that, half of the remaining caffeine is still there. It takes a surprisingly long time for caffeine to completely clear your system. This is why drinking coffee in the afternoon can interfere with sleep at night, even if you don't feel wired. The caffeine might not be keeping you awake directly, but it's degrading the quality of your sleep, reducing the amount of deep sleep you get. And sleep quality matters enormously. During deep sleep, your brain clears out metabolic waste products, consolidates memories, repairs cellular damage. When caffeine interferes with this process, you wake up less rested, which makes you reach for more caffeine, which further degrades your sleep quality. It's a vicious cycle. Interestingly, genetics plays a huge role in how you respond to caffeine. There's a gene called CYP1A2 that controls how quickly your liver breaks down caffeine. People with one variant of this gene are fast metabolizers. They clear caffeine quickly and can drink coffee in the evening without affecting their sleep. People with another variant are slow metabolizers. Caffeine hits them harder and lasts longer. There's also a gene called ADORA2A that affects adenosine receptors. Variations in this gene influence how sensitive you are to caffeine's effects. Some people can drink espresso before bed and sleep like babies. Others get jittery from a single cup of tea. It's largely genetic. This genetic variation has interesting implications. It means that caffeine's effects aren't universal. What works for one person might not work for another. The optimal amount of caffeine for health and performance varies based on your individual biology. Some studies suggest that for fast metabolizers, moderate coffee consumption is associated with health benefits. But for slow metabolizers, even moderate consumption might increase the risk of certain health problems. We're still figuring this out, but it's clear that one-size-fits-all recommendations about caffeine don't make much sense. Now, let's talk about what caffeine does to cognitive function, because this is really why we consume it in the first place. Does it actually make you smarter, more creative, better at your job? The research is nuanced. Caffeine definitely improves certain types of cognitive performance. It enhances alertness, vigilance, reaction time, and the ability to sustain attention on boring tasks. If you need to stay focused on something repetitive or monotonous, caffeine helps. It also improves physical performance. Athletes have known this for years. Caffeine reduces perceived exertion, meaning you can push yourself harder without feeling like you're working as hard. It mobilizes fatty acids for energy, spares glycogen, and improves muscle contraction. This is why many athletes consume caffeine before competition. But when it comes to complex cognitive tasks, creativity, or problem-solving, the evidence is more mixed. Some studies show improvements, others show no effect or even impairment. It might depend on the task, the dose, individual differences, and whether you're a habitual user. There's a theory that caffeine helps you do what you're already doing, but doesn't necessarily help you do new things. It enhances execution but not necessarily innovation. It's the drug of productivity, not creativity. This makes sense when you think about caffeine's role in modern society. We don't drink coffee to have creative breakthroughs. We drink it to power through our to-do lists, to stay focused during boring meetings, to keep working when we're tired. And this is where caffeine's story intersects with the story of modern work culture. Because caffeine didn't just enable the modern workplace. It shaped what that workplace looks like and how it functions. Before caffeine, work rhythms were different. People worked when they had energy and rested when they didn't. Tasks were completed at a natural pace. The idea of sustained, focused effort for 8 or 10 or 12 hours straight wasn't really feasible. Caffeine changed that. It made it possible to standardize work hours, to demand consistent output, to measure productivity in quantifiable ways. The factory system, the office, the modern corporation, these all depend on workers being alert and productive during set hours. And workers, in turn, came to depend on caffeine to meet those demands. Coffee breaks weren't just a perk. They were a necessity. Without them, productivity would plummet. This created a kind of arms race. Employers demanded more hours, more productivity. Workers consumed more caffeine to meet those demands. This allowed employers to demand even more, which led to even more caffeine consumption. And round it goes. We're living in the end result of this process. A world where it's normal to be tired all the time, to rely on caffeine just to function, to feel like you need a substance just to be your baseline self. And here's the really insidious part. Caffeine makes you a better worker, but not necessarily a better person. It doesn't make you happier, more fulfilled, more connected to others. It just makes you more productive, more able to meet the demands of a system that often doesn't have your best interests at heart. Now, I'm not saying caffeine is evil or that we should all quit. I'm just pointing out that caffeine consumption is embedded in larger social and economic structures. When we drink coffee, we're not just consuming a beverage. We're participating in a system, accepting its values, internalizing its demands. If you're still with me on this journey, and I really hope you are, take a second to leave a comment about your relationship with caffeine. Are you dependent on it? Could you quit if you wanted to? Have you tried? I'm genuinely curious about people's experiences with this ubiquitous drug we all consume. Let's shift gears and talk about some of the specific regional traditions around tea and coffee, because the ways different cultures have incorporated caffeine reveal a lot about those cultures themselves. Start with Japan and the tea ceremony, or shinoyu. This isn't just about drinking tea. It's a spiritual practice, a meditation, an art form. The ceremony can last for hours and involves elaborate, precise movements. Every gesture has meaning. The way you hold the bowl, the way you turn it, the way you drink, it's all prescribed. The philosophy behind the tea ceremony emphasizes 4 principles: harmony, respect, purity, and tranquility. It's about being fully present in the moment, about appreciating simplicity and imperfection, about connecting with others in a deep and meaningful way. Think about how different this is from grabbing a coffee at Starbucks. The Japanese tea ceremony takes caffeine consumption and transforms it into something transcendent, something that nourishes the soul as much as it stimulates the body. In China, tea culture is equally rich but different in character. Gongfu tea, a traditional Chinese tea ceremony, is about appreciating the subtle flavors and aromas of high-quality tea. You brew the tea in small vessels, using a lot of leaf and short steeping times, and you drink it from tiny cups. The idea is to really taste the tea, to notice how the flavor changes from one steeping to the next, to be fully present with the experience. It's meditative but less formal than the Japanese ceremony, more about pleasure and appreciation than spiritual discipline. In Morocco, tea culture revolves around mint tea, a sweet green tea brewed with fresh mint and lots of sugar. Preparing and serving tea is a sign of hospitality. When you visit someone's home, refusing tea would be a serious insult. The preparation is a performance. The tea is poured from a height to create foam, which is considered a sign of quality. The host will often taste the tea first to make sure it's perfect before serving guests. This ritual creates bonds, establishes trust, shows respect. In Ethiopia, where coffee originated, the coffee ceremony is similarly important. The process starts with roasting green coffee beans over a flame. The smoke from the roasting beans is wafted around the room to bless the space. Then the beans are ground by hand, brewed in a special pot called a jabina, and served in small cups. The ceremony happens 3 times, with 3 rounds of coffee, each weaker than the last. The first round is called abel and is the strongest. The second is tana. The third is baraka, which means blessing. Participating in all 3 rounds is considered good luck. These ceremonies take time, sometimes hours. They're social events, opportunities for conversation and connection. Coffee isn't just fuel. It's the centerpiece of community life. Compare this to American coffee culture, at least the modern version. We drink coffee on the go, in our cars, walking down the street. We order it through apps and pick it up without even talking to another person. We optimize for efficiency and convenience, sacrificing ritual and connection in the process. There's something lost in that trade-off. The spiritual and social dimensions of caffeine consumption, the sense of it being a sacred or meaningful act, that's largely gone from modern Western culture. Although, to be fair, there are efforts to reclaim some of that meaning. The specialty coffee movement, for all its pretensions, is partly about treating coffee as worthy of attention and respect. When a barista carefully weighs beans, measures water temperature, times the extraction, they're creating a kind of secular ritual, a way of saying this matters, this is worth doing well. The same is true for tea enthusiasts who invest in quality leaves, proper tea ware, and take time to brew and savor their tea. They're pushing back against the disposable, convenience-oriented culture, trying to find meaning and mindfulness in the simple act of drinking a caffeinated beverage. In Britain, afternoon tea remains a cherished tradition, though it's less common than it once was. There's something civilized about stopping work at 4 o'clock for tea and biscuits, about acknowledging that humans aren't machines and need rest and refreshment. The Italians have a similar tradition with their espresso culture. Italians typically drink espresso at a bar, standing up, quickly. But there's a social dimension to it. You chat with the barista, exchange greetings with other regulars. It's a brief moment of human connection in the middle of the day. These traditions remind us that caffeine consumption doesn't have to be purely utilitarian. It can be a source of pleasure, connection, meaning. It can punctuate the day, create rhythms, mark transitions between different types of activity. But these traditions are under pressure in the modern world. The pace of life keeps accelerating, driven partly by caffeine itself. There's less time for ritual, for slowness, for savoring. Everything must be optimized, made efficient, stripped of anything that doesn't directly contribute to productivity. This is a loss, culturally and personally. When we lose the rituals around caffeine, we lose one more way of creating meaning and structure in our lives. Let me tell you about some specific figures in coffee and tea history, because behind every major development were actual people with their own motivations, quirks, and stories. Take James Hill, for example. He was an Englishman who went to El Salvador in the late 19th century and became one of the most powerful coffee barons in Central America. Hill didn't just grow coffee. He reshaped El Salvador's entire economy and society around coffee production. He brought in new cultivation techniques, built processing facilities, established export networks. But he also bought up vast amounts of land, displacing small farmers. He lobbied the government to pass laws favorable to large landowners. He helped create an oligarchy of coffee elites that dominated El Salvador for generations. The wealth generated by coffee didn't go to the people working the fields. It went to a small number of families, the 14 families, as they were known, who controlled most of the country's land and wealth. This inequality eventually contributed to El Salvador's brutal civil war in the 1980s. So when you drink Salvadoran coffee, you're tasting that history. The legacy of colonialism, exploitation, and conflict is in every bean. Or consider Roselius Ludwig, a German coffee merchant who invented decaffeinated coffee in 1903. According to the story, Roslius's father died, and he believed excessive coffee consumption was to blame. So he set out to create a way to remove caffeine from coffee while preserving the flavor. His method involved steaming green coffee beans with various acids, then using benzene to extract the caffeine. Benzene, we now know, is carcinogenic, so that particular method isn't used anymore. But Roslius had hit upon something important. Not everyone wanted caffeine, but many people still enjoyed the taste and ritual of coffee. Decaf coffee was initially marketed as a health product, coffee that wouldn't harm your heart or nerves. The brand name was Sanka, short for sans caffeine, without caffeine in French. It became hugely popular, particularly among older adults and people with health concerns. Nowadays, decaf coffee is made using much safer methods, usually either the Swiss water process, which uses only water and activated carbon, or carbon dioxide extraction. And while coffee snobs often dismiss decaf, it serves an important purpose. It allows people to enjoy coffee for reasons other than its stimulant effects. Then there's Angelo Moriando, an Italian inventor who created the first espresso machine in 1884. Before Moriando, coffee was brewed by steeping grounds in hot water, a slow process. Moriando's machine forced hot water through coffee grounds under pressure, extracting flavor quickly. This invention revolutionized coffee drinking. It made it possible to serve coffee quickly in cafes and bars. It created espresso, cappuccino, latte, all the drinks that form the basis of modern coffee culture. Interestingly, Moriando never really capitalized on his invention. He patented it but didn't promote it widely. Other inventors, like Luigi Bezzera and Desiderio Pavoni, improved on his design and brought espresso machines to market. By the early 20th century, espresso bars were popping up all over Italy. The espresso machine changed not just how coffee tasted but how it was consumed. Quick, intense, social. The espresso bar became a third place, not home, not work, but somewhere in between. A place to pause, to see and be seen, to participate in public life. Let's talk about Sarah Josepha Hale, a 19th century American writer and editor who probably did more than anyone to popularize tea drinking in America. Hale edited Godey's Lady's Book, the most influential women's magazine of its time, and she used her platform to promote afternoon tea as a refined, civilized practice. She published tea party menus, etiquette guides, and stories about elegant tea gatherings. She positioned tea drinking as a marker of good breeding and sophistication. For middle-class American women looking to assert their social status, hosting a proper tea party became essential. Hale's influence extended beyond tea. She was also a tireless campaigner for various causes, including education for women and the establishment of Thanksgiving as a national holiday. But her promotion of tea culture had lasting effects on American society, creating rituals and traditions that persisted for generations. Another fascinating figure is Muhammad ibn Sa'id al-Dabhani, a 15th century Yemeni scholar who wrote one of the earliest treatises on coffee. At the time, there was debate among Islamic scholars about whether coffee was permissible under Islamic law. Some argued that because coffee was intoxicating, it should be banned like alcohol. Al-Dabhani argued that coffee wasn't intoxicating in the same way as alcohol. It stimulated rather than stupefied. It enhanced rather than impaired judgment. His arguments helped establish coffee as acceptable within Islam, which allowed coffee culture to flourish in the Islamic world. Without al-Dabhani's advocacy, coffee's history might have been very different. It might have remained a marginal stimulant rather than becoming central to Islamic civilization and eventually spreading to Europe and beyond. These individuals, and countless others whose names we don't know, shaped caffeine's history through their actions, inventions, and advocacy. History isn't just about broad social forces. It's also about specific people making specific choices that ripple outward through time. If this deep dive into caffeine's history is keeping you engaged, hit that subscribe button for dreamless timelines. We do this kind of comprehensive historical storytelling regularly, and your support means we can keep creating these videos. Drop a like if you're enjoying this, and let me know in the comments what historical topic you'd like us to cover next. Now let's talk about caffeine in popular culture, because the way caffeine shows up in our movies, TV shows, music, and literature reveals a lot about our relationship with it. Think about how coffee is portrayed in film and television. It's everywhere, but often in the background, unremarked upon. Characters constantly drink coffee, but it's rarely a plot point. It's just what people do. Except when it is remarked upon. In Twin Peaks, Agent Cooper's love of damn fine coffee becomes a defining character trait. In Seinfeld, the characters spend half their time in a coffee shop having conversations that go nowhere. In Friends, the gang's hangout is Central Perk, a coffee shop. These shows use coffee shops as neutral spaces where the real action, conversation, and relationship drama can unfold. Coffee is the excuse for gathering, the prop that gives people something to do with their hands, but it's not really what the scenes are about. Except, maybe it is. Maybe the ubiquity of coffee in these shows reflects its ubiquity in real life. Maybe having characters constantly drinking coffee makes them more relatable, more realistic, more like us. In literature, coffee and tea show up in interesting ways. In T.S. Eliot's The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, the speaker measures out his life in coffee spoons, a perfect image of modern ennui and repetition. Life becomes a series of routine gestures, meaningless rituals, with coffee as the marker of time passing. In Jack Kerouac's On the Road, coffee is fuel for the journey, the drug that keeps the characters moving, searching, experiencing. They drink endless cups of diner coffee, cheap and strong, as they drive across America pursuing some undefined freedom. In Haruki Murakami's novels, characters often drink coffee in moments of contemplation or transition. The act of making and drinking coffee becomes a kind of meditation, a way of processing emotions or preparing for whatever comes next. In science fiction, caffeine often appears as a relic of human culture, something we carry with us even to the stars. In Star Trek, Captain Picard is famous for his tea, Earl Grey, hot, order to the replicator. It's a small detail, but it humanizes him, connects the distant future to our present. In cyberpunk literature, caffeine is often mixed with other substances, part of a cocktail of drugs used to enhance performance or alter consciousness. Characters mainline coffee and amphetamines, trying to keep up with a hyper-accelerated world. Music has its own relationship with caffeine. Jazz musicians drank coffee to stay alert during late-night sessions. The coffeehouse folk scene of the 1960s was fueled by, well, coffee. Punk rock embraced caffeine, particularly in the form of cheap diner coffee, as the working-class drug of choice. There are songs about coffee, though not as many as you might expect. Otis Redding's Cigarettes and Coffee, Frank Sinatra's The Coffee Song, Squeeze's Black Coffee in Bed. These songs use coffee as a symbol of mourning after loneliness, of routine, of bittersweet comfort. In advertising, caffeine products are sold using specific emotional appeals. Coffee ads often emphasize ritual, comfort, connection. They show people bonding over coffee, finding solace in their morning cup, creating moments of pause in busy lives. Energy drink ads go in the opposite direction. They emphasize extreme sports, risk-taking, pushing limits. The message is about transgression, about refusing to slow down, about being more than human. These contrasting approaches reflect the dual nature of caffeine. It can be comforting or exciting, traditional or rebellious, depending on the form and context. The way caffeine shows up in popular culture has evolved over time, reflecting changing attitudes. In the 1950s, coffee ads emphasized domestic bliss. The perfect housewife served perfect coffee to her perfect husband. It was about conformity and traditional gender roles. In the 1960s and 70s, coffee became associated with counterculture, with coffeehouses as spaces for dissent and alternative lifestyles. Coffee ads started emphasizing authenticity, quality, sophistication. In the 80s and 90s, coffee became yuppified. Starbucks-style coffee culture was about status, about being the kind of person who knows the difference between a latte and a macchiato, who can afford to spend $5 on a cup of coffee. In the 2000s and 2010s, we got the third wave coffee movement, with its emphasis on craft, origin, sustainability. Coffee ads became more earnest, telling stories about farmers and fair trade and single-origin beans. Now, in the 2020s, we're seeing a kind of fragmentation. There's high-end specialty coffee for connoisseurs, Starbucks for the masses, cheap diner coffee for traditionalists, and elaborate sugary drinks for people who don't really like coffee but want the caffeine and Instagram-worthy aesthetics. And alongside coffee, energy drinks have carved out their own space in popular culture. They're associated with gaming, extreme sports, late-night cramming, working multiple jobs. They're the drink of hustle culture, of people pushing themselves to the limit. The marketing is almost dystopian in its honesty. These drinks aren't sold as pleasurable or comforting. They're sold as tools, as performance enhancers, as ways to extract more productivity from your body despite its natural limits. And we buy them. Millions of us, every day, consuming these brightly colored concoctions, willingly participating in our own exploitation. It sounds harsh, but think about it. When you're so tired that you need a chemical stimulant just to function, maybe the problem isn't that you lack caffeine. Maybe the problem is the system that demands so much from you that you can't function without chemical assistance. But I digress. The point is that caffeine's role in popular culture mirrors its role in society. It's both ubiquitous and invisible, both celebrated and taken for granted. Let's talk about the health effects of caffeine in more detail, because this is where science and culture collide in interesting ways. For decades, coffee had a bad reputation health-wise. Doctors told people to avoid it. It was blamed for heart disease, cancer, ulcers, all sorts of ailments. This was partly based on research, but also partly cultural bias. Coffee was associated with vice, with smoking and drinking, with staying up too late and burning the candle at both ends. But as research methods improved and more rigorous studies were conducted, the picture changed dramatically. It turns out that moderate coffee consumption, defined as about 3 to 5 cups a day, is associated with numerous health benefits. Studies have found that coffee drinkers have lower risks of Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's disease, type 2 diabetes, liver disease, certain types of cancer, and even overall mortality. People who drink coffee tend to live longer than people who don't, even after controlling for other lifestyle factors. Now, correlation isn't causation. It's possible that something else about coffee drinkers, rather than the coffee itself, explains these associations. But the evidence is pretty strong, and there are plausible biological mechanisms. Coffee contains hundreds of bioactive compounds, not just caffeine. There are antioxidants like chlorogenic acids, anti-inflammatory compounds, substances that affect metabolism and cell signaling. When you drink coffee, you're consuming a complex chemical cocktail, and many of these compounds seem to be beneficial. Caffeine itself may be neuroprotective. Some research suggests it helps prevent the accumulation of proteins associated with Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. It may also enhance the brain's ability to repair itself and form new connections. The liver benefits are particularly interesting. Coffee consumption is associated with lower levels of liver enzymes, reduced risk of cirrhosis, and even slower progression of liver disease in people who already have it. The mechanisms aren't entirely clear, but coffee seems to protect the liver from damage. The diabetes connection is also well established. Coffee improves insulin sensitivity and glucose metabolism. Some studies suggest that each cup of coffee per day is associated with about a 7% reduction in diabetes risk. But here's where it gets complicated. These benefits are associated with coffee, not necessarily with caffeine. Decaf coffee shows many of the same health benefits, which suggests that other compounds in coffee are responsible. And pure caffeine, consumed in other forms, doesn't necessarily provide the same benefits. In fact, high doses of caffeine from energy drinks or supplements can cause problems. Rapid heartbeat, anxiety, insomnia, digestive issues. There have been deaths associated with energy drink consumption, particularly among young people with underlying heart conditions. The combination of high caffeine doses, other stimulants like taurine and guarana, and often lots of sugar creates a powerful and potentially dangerous cocktail. The FDA regulates caffeine in sodas, limiting them to about 70 milligrams per 12 ounces. But energy drinks aren't classified as sodas. They're classified as dietary supplements, which means they're not subject to the same regulations. A can of energy drink can contain 300 milligrams of caffeine or more, plus other stimulants. This is particularly concerning for adolescents and young adults, whose brains are still developing. Excessive caffeine consumption during these years might have long-term effects on brain development, though we don't fully understand the implications yet. There's also the question of caffeine and mental health. For some people, caffeine triggers or worsens anxiety. The physical symptoms of caffeine consumption, increased heart rate, jitteriness, can be indistinguishable from anxiety symptoms. If you're already prone to anxiety, caffeine can tip you over the edge into a full-blown panic attack. On the other hand, some research suggests that moderate coffee consumption is associated with lower rates of depression. The reasons aren't entirely clear, but it might have to do with caffeine's effects on dopamine and other neurotransmitters. The relationship between caffeine and sleep is complex and crucial. Caffeine is an adenosine antagonist, remember, which means it blocks the signals that tell your brain you're tired. But those signals are important. They're how your body regulates sleep-wake cycles. When you consume caffeine, especially later in the day, you're interfering with your natural circadian rhythms. You might not feel tired, but your body still needs sleep. And when you do sleep, the quality is often degraded. Caffeine reduces the amount of deep sleep you get, even if you fall asleep at a normal time. Chronic sleep deprivation has serious health consequences. It's associated with obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, impaired immune function, mental health problems, cognitive decline. It's not an exaggeration to say that lack of sleep is killing people. And caffeine is often both the cause and the supposed solution. People don't get enough sleep, so they drink caffeine to cope. The caffeine interferes with their sleep, so they get even less sleep, so they need even more caffeine. It's a downward spiral. Breaking this cycle requires actually addressing the sleep deprivation, not just treating the symptoms with caffeine. But that's hard to do in a society that values productivity over rest, that treats sleep as a luxury rather than a biological necessity. There's also the question of caffeine and pregnancy. Pregnant women are generally advised to limit caffeine consumption to about 200 milligrams per day, roughly 2 cups of coffee. Higher consumption has been associated with increased risk of miscarriage and low birth weight, though the evidence is somewhat mixed. Caffeine crosses the placenta, and fetuses can't metabolize it effectively. It accumulates in fetal tissues, potentially affecting development. Most doctors recommend caution, even if the science isn't entirely settled. Caffeine also affects bone health, at least in high doses. It increases calcium excretion, which over time could contribute to osteoporosis. But the effect is small, and it can be offset by adequate calcium intake. Then there are the cardiovascular effects. Caffeine raises blood pressure temporarily, and in some people, this effect persists with regular use. For people with high blood pressure or heart problems, this could be a concern. But again, the research is nuanced. Most studies don't find an association between moderate coffee consumption and increased risk of heart disease. Some even find protective effects. It seems that for most people, the cardiovascular effects of moderate caffeine consumption are minimal. The key word is moderate. Like most things, caffeine follows a dose-response curve. A little is probably beneficial, a moderate amount is generally safe, and too much can cause problems. The trick is figuring out where you fall on that curve, which depends on your individual biology, health status, and consumption patterns. And here's the thing. We're all conducting an experiment on ourselves, whether we realize it or not. Every time you drink coffee or tea or an energy drink, you're making a choice about what substances you put in your body and how they affect you. Most people don't think about it that way. They just drink coffee because it's what they've always done, because everyone does it, because they can't imagine starting the day without it. But maybe it's worth being more intentional, paying attention to how caffeine actually makes you feel, noticing whether it's helping or hurting, being honest about whether you're consuming it because you want to or because you feel like you have to. Because here's a secret that the caffeine industry doesn't want you to know. You don't actually need caffeine. Your body is perfectly capable of being alert and energetic without it. given adequate sleep, nutrition, and exercise. Caffeine isn't giving you energy. It's just masking your tiredness. It's a chemical band-aid over deeper issues. And while there's nothing inherently wrong with that, it's worth being clear-eyed about what's actually happening. Some people who quit caffeine report feeling better after the initial withdrawal period. More stable energy throughout the day, better sleep, less anxiety. Their bodies recalibrate to functioning without the constant chemical stimulation. Other people find that moderate caffeine use enhances their lives. It's a ritual they enjoy, a boost that helps them perform better, a social lubricant that facilitates connection. There's no one right answer. But it's worth examining your own relationship with caffeine honestly, without judgment but also without self-deception. Alright, let's talk about the economics of caffeine, because this is where the story gets really interesting from a global perspective. Coffee is one of the most valuable traded commodities on Earth. The global coffee market is worth over $100 billion annually. About 125 million people worldwide depend on coffee for their livelihoods. It's the primary export of several countries. But the economics of coffee are brutally unequal. Coffee farmers, the people who actually grow the beans, receive only a tiny fraction of what consumers pay. A farmer in Ethiopia might get 50 cents per pound for coffee that sells for $15 per pound in a New York cafe. The coffee supply chain is long and complex. Farmers sell to local buyers, who sell to exporters, who sell to importers, who sell to roasters, who sell to retailers, who sell to consumers. At each step, someone takes a cut. By the time the coffee reaches your cup, the price has multiplied many times over. This system has created immense wealth for some and kept others in poverty. The big coffee companies, Nestle, JAB Holding Company, Starbucks, these corporations make billions in profits. Meanwhile, coffee farmers often struggle to earn a living wage. The situation is exacerbated by the global commodity market. Coffee prices fluctuate wildly based on weather, crop yields, speculation by traders, global economic conditions. Farmers have little control over what they'll be paid for their crop. They plant coffee and hope the price will be decent when harvest time comes. When prices crash, as they periodically do, farmers can find themselves selling coffee for less than it cost to produce. They go into debt, lose their land, abandon coffee farming altogether. This creates cycles of poverty that are hard to escape. The coffee crisis of the early 2000s was particularly devastating. Overproduction, partly driven by Vietnam entering the coffee market in a big way, caused prices to plummet. Millions of coffee farmers were pushed into extreme poverty. Some committed suicide. Others migrated to cities or other countries, seeking any work they could find. Fair trade certification emerged partly in response to this crisis. The idea was to guarantee farmers a minimum price, regardless of market fluctuations, and to establish direct relationships between farmers and buyers, cutting out some of the middlemen. Fair trade has helped some farmers, providing more stable incomes and funding for community development projects. But it's not a panacea. Only a small percentage of global coffee is fair trade certified, and the certification process can be expensive and bureaucratic for small farmers. Direct trade, where roasters work directly with farmers, is another model. This can ensure better prices and more equitable relationships. But it requires roasters to invest time and money in building those relationships, and it only works at relatively small scales. The larger structural problem is that coffee farming, as currently practiced, is economically marginal. The global supply of coffee exceeds demand, which keeps prices low. Farmers compete with each other, driving prices down further. And they have little power to change this dynamic. Climate change is making everything worse. Rising temperatures are pushing coffee cultivation to higher elevations. Changing rainfall patterns are making yields less predictable. Pests and diseases are spreading to new areas. Some estimates suggest that by mid-century, half the land currently used for coffee will be unsuitable. This could lead to a coffee shortage, driving prices up. But it will also displace millions of farmers who depend on coffee for their livelihoods. There are efforts to develop climate-resilient coffee varieties, to improve farming practices, to help farmers adapt. But these efforts are racing against time and are often underfunded. The tea market has similar dynamics, though the specific details differ. Tea farming is often more industrialized, with large plantations rather than small farms. Workers on tea plantations have historically been paid very low wages and subjected to poor working conditions. In India, tea plantation workers were often semi-enslaved, bound to the plantation by debt. In Sri Lanka and Kenya, plantation workers have struggled for decades to improve wages and conditions, often facing violent repression. The legacy of colonialism is stark in the tea industry. The British created the plantation system specifically to extract wealth from colonies. Even after independence, the power structures remained largely intact. The people who work the land rarely benefit from its productivity. Fair trade and organic certifications have emerged in the tea industry too, with similar promises and limitations. Some workers have seen improvements, but many remain trapped in poverty. And consumers, for the most part, remain blissfully unaware of these realities. We drink our coffee and tea without thinking about where it came from or under what conditions it was produced. The supply chain is long enough and opaque enough that we can ignore the uncomfortable truths. But those truths are always there, in every cup. The exploitation, the inequality, the environmental destruction. These are the hidden costs of our caffeine habit. I don't say this to make you feel guilty. Guilt without action is useless. But awareness matters. Understanding the full story, not just the pleasant parts, is the first step toward making better choices. You can buy fair trade or direct trade coffee and tea. You can support companies that are transparent about their sourcing and labor practices. You can advocate for policies that support farmers and workers in producing countries. You can consume less, reducing overall demand. These individual actions won't solve the systemic problems, but they're not nothing. And they reflect a consciousness about the fact that our consumption choices have consequences that ripple out into the world. If you're finding this exploration valuable, let me know in the comments. What's your take on the ethics of coffee and tea consumption? Do you think about where your caffeine comes from? Have you changed your buying habits based on these concerns? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Now let's talk about some of the innovations in caffeine delivery and consumption, because this is an area that's evolving rapidly. We've already mentioned energy drinks, but let's go deeper. The energy drink market has exploded over the past 2 decades. What started with Red Bull has become a multi-billion-dollar industry with hundreds of brands. These drinks typically contain caffeine, taurine, B vitamins, and various other ingredients of dubious efficacy. The caffeine content varies widely, from about 80 milligrams in a small can to over 300 milligrams in larger sizes or more concentrated products. The marketing targets specific demographics. Red Bull goes after extreme sports enthusiasts and people who need a quick boost. Monster appeals to a younger, more rebellious crowd. Rockstar has a similar vibe, but with more emphasis on music and partying. Then there are the functional energy drinks like Celsius, which market themselves as healthier alternatives. They contain no sugar, include metabolism-boosting ingredients, and position themselves as fitness products rather than just caffeine delivery systems. The newest trend is energy drinks marketed specifically for gaming. Brands like G Fuel and Sneak sponsor esports athletes and streamers. These products often come in powder form that you mix with water, and they're designed for sustained focus rather than a quick jolt. The gaming energy drink market is fascinating because it's explicitly about cognitive performance. The marketing doesn't even pretend to be about physical energy. It's about reaction time, focus, mental endurance. It's nootropics for the masses. And speaking of nootropics, this is a rapidly growing category. Nootropics are substances that supposedly enhance cognitive function. The category includes everything from caffeine to prescription medications to various plant extracts and synthetic compounds. Coffee companies have started adding nootropics to their products. You can now buy coffee enhanced with L-theanine, an amino acid found in tea that supposedly promotes calm focus, or coffee with MCT oil, which is claimed to provide sustained energy. or coffee with collagen peptides for skin health. There are also caffeine pills and tablets, which deliver pure caffeine without the beverage. These appeal to people who want the effects of caffeine without the calories, the need to use the bathroom, or the time required to drink a beverage. Caffeine gum is another innovation. It delivers caffeine through the mucous membranes in your mouth, which means it works faster than coffee or pills. Military personnel and athletes use it when they need a quick boost. There are caffeine mints, caffeine waffles, caffeine protein bars. Basically, any food product you can think of, someone has tried adding caffeine to it. The most bizarre might be caffeinated water. It's just water with caffeine added, no flavor, no calories. Pure hydration and stimulation. It seems almost dystopian, stripping caffeine down to its most basic, functional form. On the opposite end of the spectrum are elaborate coffee preparations that treat caffeine as an artisanal product. Third-wave coffee shops use precise brewing methods, carefully controlled water temperatures, expensive equipment. Pour-over coffee has become an art form. The barista wets the grounds, waits 30 seconds for them to bloom, then pours water in a slow spiral, maintaining a precise flow rate. The whole process takes several minutes and requires skill and attention. Cold brew is another trendy preparation. Coffee is steeped in cold water for 12 to 24 hours, producing a concentrate that's smoother and less acidic than hot brewed coffee. It's then diluted and served over ice. Nitro cold brew takes it further. Cold brew is infused with nitrogen gas and served from a tap, like beer. The nitrogen creates a creamy texture and cascading effect. It's coffee as spectacle. Espresso has spawned an entire subculture of enthusiasts who obsess over grind size, tamping pressure, extraction time, water chemistry. They spend thousands of dollars on home espresso machines and grinders, chasing the perfect shot. There's something amusing about this contrast. On one hand, caffeine as pure function, stripped of all context and meaning. On the other, caffeine as art, laden with ritual and requiring expertise. Both approaches are responses to the same reality. We want caffeine, need caffeine, have built our lives around it. How we consume it becomes a way of expressing identity and values. The tech industry has gotten involved too. There are smart coffee makers that you can control with your phone, that learn your preferences, that can start brewing before you wake up. There are apps that track your caffeine consumption and tell you when you're drinking too much or too late in the day. There's even research into transdermal caffeine delivery, patches that would release caffeine through your skin throughout the day, or inhalers that would let you breathe in caffeine vapor. The goal is always to optimize, to make caffeine delivery more efficient and controllable. This optimization mindset is very modern, very Silicon Valley. The idea that everything can be measured, tracked, improved. That even something as simple as drinking coffee can be hacked and optimized. There's something both impressive and sad about it. Impressive because of the ingenuity and innovation. Sad because it reflects how desperate we are to extract every bit of productivity from ourselves, to optimize our biology in service of work. But this is where we are. Caffeine has gone from a plant discovered by accident to a molecule we're trying to engineer into every aspect of our lives. Let's talk about caffeine and creativity, because this is a question that's fascinated people for centuries. Do coffee and tea actually make you more creative? And if so, how? The relationship is complicated. Caffeine definitely affects cognition, but not all cognitive processes in the same way. It enhances what psychologists call convergent thinking, the ability to focus on a problem and work toward a specific solution. This is the type of thinking needed for analytical tasks, for following logical steps, for executing a plan. But creativity often requires divergent thinking, the ability to generate multiple ideas, to make unusual connections, to think in nonlinear ways. And here, the evidence for caffeine's benefits is weaker. Some studies suggest that moderate caffeine consumption can enhance certain types of creative thinking, particularly problem-solving that requires connecting disparate pieces of information. But other research finds no effect or even impairment on divergent thinking tasks. There's a theory that caffeine helps you execute creative ideas but doesn't necessarily help you generate them. It's the drug of production, not inspiration. Once you know what you want to do, caffeine helps you do it efficiently. But it might not help you come up with the idea in the first place. This might explain why so many artists, writers, and musicians have complicated relationships with caffeine. They drink it to power through the work of creation, but they often find that their most creative insights come in different states of consciousness. Balzac, the French novelist, was a legendary coffee addict. He supposedly drank 50 cups a day, often consuming coffee grounds directly when brewed coffee wasn't strong enough. He needed this stimulation to maintain the intense work schedule he set for himself, often writing for 15 or 16 hours straight. But Balzac's creativity didn't come from the coffee. It came from his genius, his imagination, his understanding of human nature. The coffee just allowed him to sit at his desk long enough to get the ideas onto paper. Voltaire, as I mentioned earlier, supposedly drank 40 to 50 cups a day. But his wit, his philosophical insights, his revolutionary ideas, these weren't products of caffeine. They were products of his mind. Caffeine just kept that mind running at full speed. Many writers have written about their relationships with coffee. Stephen King has described coffee as essential to his morning writing routine. He drinks a pot or more before starting work. But he's also clear that the coffee doesn't make him a better writer. It just helps him get into the right mental state to write. Ernest Hemingway, on the other hand, did his best writing early in the morning, often before having coffee. He wanted his mind clear and sharp, undulled by substances. He'd write for several hours, then have coffee and breakfast as a reward. T.S. Eliot, who gave us that image of measuring life in coffee spoons, understood that coffee was both facilitator and trap. It enabled modern life, made it possible to function in a mechanized world, but it also symbolized that world's emptiness and repetition. In the music world, Bach supposedly wrote a humorous cantata about coffee addiction, the Coffee Cantata. It tells the story of a young woman whose father wants her to give up coffee, but she refuses, declaring that coffee is more delicious than 1,000 kisses. Jazz musicians, as I mentioned, drank copious amounts of coffee during late-night sessions. But they were also often using other substances, amphetamines and later heroin, seeking altered states that would unlock new musical possibilities. The question is whether caffeine and creativity are truly linked, or whether creative people just tend to drink a lot of coffee because they're working long hours and need to stay alert. My guess is it's mostly the latter. Caffeine doesn't make you creative. But if you're already creative and you need to put in the hours to realize your vision, caffeine can help you stay focused and productive. There's also the ritual aspect. For many creative people, making and drinking coffee is part of the creative routine. It's a signal to the brain that it's time to work. It's a small reward, a moment of pleasure, that makes the hard work of creation more bearable. And coffeehouses have historically been gathering places for artists and intellectuals. The conversations that happen in cafes, the exchange of ideas, the exposure to different perspectives, these can spark creativity in ways that caffeine itself cannot. So maybe caffeine's relationship with creativity is more social and ritual than chemical. It creates spaces and routines that facilitate creative work, even if it doesn't directly enhance creative thinking. Let me tell you about the future of caffeine, or at least where things seem to be heading based on current trends. One major trend is personalization. As we learn more about how genetics influence caffeine metabolism and response, we're moving toward personalized caffeine recommendations. Companies are already offering genetic tests that analyze your CYP1A2 and ADORA2A genes and tell you whether you're a fast or slow metabolizer, how sensitive you are to caffeine's effects. Based on this information, they provide personalized advice about how much caffeine to consume and when. The idea is to optimize your caffeine intake based on your individual biology rather than following generic guidelines. This could extend to personalized caffeine products. Imagine a subscription service that delivers coffee blended specifically for your genetic profile, or pills that release caffeine at rates optimized for your metabolism. We're also likely to see more functional caffeine products that combine caffeine with other substances targeting specific outcomes. Coffee for focus, coffee for relaxation, coffee for physical performance. Each one would have a different blend of caffeine and other bioactive compounds. The technology for this already exists. We can measure blood levels of various compounds, track biometric data, use algorithms to optimize dosing. It's just a matter of companies developing products and consumers adopting them. Another trend is sustainability. As climate change threatens coffee production and consumers become more conscious of environmental and social issues, there's growing demand for sustainably produced coffee and tea. This could mean more organic farming, more shade-grown coffee, better treatment of workers, more direct trade relationships. It could also mean innovations in how coffee is grown. There's research into growing coffee in controlled environments, basically vertical farms for coffee. This would allow production in areas not traditionally suitable for coffee, reduce water use, eliminate the need for pesticides, and make yields more predictable. There's even research into producing coffee through cellular agriculture, growing coffee cells in bioreactors without ever planting a tree. This sounds like science fiction, but companies are actively working on it. If they succeed, it could revolutionize coffee production, making it independent of climate and geography. Tea could see similar innovations. Lab-grown tea, fermented tea substitutes, optimized tea plants engineered for specific climates or chemical profiles. Whether consumers will accept these technologies remains to be seen. There's often resistance to foods produced through unconventional methods, even when they're more sustainable. But economic and environmental pressures might overcome cultural preferences. We might also see regulation of caffeine become stricter, particularly for products targeting young people. As evidence accumulates about the health risks of excessive caffeine consumption, especially in adolescents, governments may impose limits on caffeine content or restrict marketing and sales. Some countries have already banned or restricted energy drink sales to minors. This trend could expand. We might see warning labels, age restrictions, or even taxes on high caffeine products, similar to how alcohol and tobacco are regulated. On the other hand, we might see broader acceptance of caffeine as a cognitive enhancer, with people openly using it for performance enhancement rather than just as a beverage. This would align with broader trends toward human enhancement and optimization. The line between coffee drinker and caffeine user is already blurry. In the future, it might disappear entirely. People might openly discuss their caffeine dosing strategies, experiment with different forms and combinations, track their responses systematically. This would represent a shift from caffeine as food/beverage to caffeine as drug/medicine. It's already happening in some circles, particularly in tech and among biohackers. It could become mainstream. There's also the question of alternatives to caffeine. Are there other substances that could provide similar benefits without the downsides? Research into this is ongoing. Some substances being explored include theocrine, found in certain teas and coffee, which has similar effects to caffeine but supposedly without tolerance or jitters. Dynamine, another naturally occurring compound that provides energy and focus. Various adaptogens like rhodiola and ashwagandha, which supposedly help the body handle stress and maintain energy. Synthetic compounds designed to mimic caffeine's benefits while avoiding its side effects. None of these has yet displaced caffeine, and it's unclear whether any will. Caffeine has the advantage of being well understood, with thousands of years of human use and extensive safety data. Any alternative would need to prove not just that it works but that it's safe over long-term use. The most likely future is continued dominance of caffeine, but with more variety in how it's consumed, more awareness of its effects, and more intentionality about its use. We might see a split between casual consumers who just enjoy coffee or tea as beverages and serious optimizers who treat caffeine as a performance-enhancing drug. Or these categories might merge, with everyone becoming more conscious and strategic about their caffeine consumption. What seems certain is that caffeine isn't going anywhere. It's too deeply embedded in human culture, too essential to modern economic systems, too effective at what it does. Our relationship with it might evolve, but the relationship itself will continue. Before we wrap up this epic journey through caffeine's history, let me share some final thoughts about what it all means. Caffeine is, in many ways, the perfect drug for modern civilization. It makes us more alert, more productive, more able to meet the demands of a world that never stops. It fits perfectly with capitalism's need for constant activity, constant growth, constant consumption. But it's also a symptom of dysfunction. In a healthier society, maybe we wouldn't need to dose ourselves with stimulants just to function. Maybe we'd organize work and life in ways that align with human biology rather than fighting against it. The fact that billions of people are dependent on a drug just to get through the day should maybe concern us more than it does. We've normalized something that, from a certain perspective, is pretty bizarre. At the same time, I don't want to be too negative. Caffeine has genuine benefits. It facilitates connection, creates rituals, provides pleasure. The coffeehouses and cafes where people gather over caffeine have been engines of culture, politics, and social change. And there's something to be said for humans taking control of their own consciousness, for using substances to shape their experience in desired ways. We've been doing it forever, with alcohol, tobacco, various plants, and fungi. Caffeine is just one more tool in that toolkit. The key is using it wisely, with awareness and intention. Not just consuming caffeine mindlessly out of habit or necessity, but choosing how and when to use it based on genuine understanding of its effects. This requires education, honesty, and a willingness to question assumptions. It requires examining our relationship with work, with productivity, with success. It requires asking hard questions about what kind of life we want to live and whether caffeine is helping or hindering that vision. For some people, the answer might be to quit caffeine entirely, to reclaim their natural rhythms, to stop masking tiredness with stimulants, to address the root causes of exhaustion rather than just treating symptoms. For others, moderate, mindful use of caffeine might enhance their lives. The morning coffee ritual, the social tea break, the boost before a workout, these can be positive additions to life when chosen consciously. There's no one right answer, but there is value in thinking about it, in being intentional, in understanding the full story of what you're consuming and why. And that's really what this whole exploration has been about. Telling the full story of caffeine, not just the pleasant parts. Tracing its path through history, understanding its effects on biology and society, acknowledging both its benefits and costs. Caffeine is woven into the fabric of modern life so thoroughly that we barely notice it. But when you pull on that thread, when you really examine it, you find that it connects to everything. To agriculture and trade, to colonialism and capitalism, to chemistry and neuroscience, to culture and identity, to our most fundamental questions about what it means to be human in the modern world. Every cup of coffee or tea is a portal into this vast interconnected story. That's pretty remarkable when you think about it. So the next time you drink caffeine, maybe take a moment. Notice the flavor, the aroma, the warmth. Think about where it came from, who grew it, how it got to you. Feel the effects in your body, the quickening alertness, the subtle shift in consciousness. And recognize that you're participating in something much larger than yourself. A story that spans centuries and continents, that connects you to billions of other people doing the same thing at the same moment, that shapes and is shaped by the entire modern world. That's the power of caffeine. Not just its chemical effects, but its meaning, its history, its role in the human story. And that story continues. Every day, in millions of moments, the story of caffeine unfolds. We're all part of it, writing new chapters with our choices and habits. Where the story goes from here, nobody knows. But it will be fascinating to watch. Thank you for joining me on this journey through caffeine's incredible history. If you've made it this far, you're a real one. Seriously. This has been a marathon, and I appreciate you sticking with it. If you found this valuable, if you learned something or just enjoyed the ride, please subscribe to Dreamless Timelines. This is what we do, these deep, immersive explorations of fascinating historical topics. Your support makes it possible for us to keep creating this content. Hit that like button, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, your experiences with caffeine, your questions. I love hearing from you, and your engagement helps other people discover these videos. And if you want more content like this, check out our other videos. We've got hours and hours of historical storytelling designed to educate and relax you, to help you drift off while learning something amazing. Until next time, sleep well, dream deep, and maybe think twice about that next cup of coffee. Or don't. Either way, you know the story now. And that's what matters. This has been Dreamless Timelines. Thank you for listening, and good night.